Hello, everybody. We're excited to have you join us today for our webinar on how to maximize the power of your network with Itential's integrated ecosystem capabilities. Before we dive in, my name is Morgan Stern, and I'm the VP of Automation Strategy at Itential. I'm joined today by one of my colleagues and frequent webinar collaborator, Karin Munalingal. Karin is the head of our solutions engineering team at Itential. How are you doing today, Karin?
Doing really well, Morgan. Thanks for having me today for the webinar.
Excellent. During today's webinar, we'll be talking about how Itential's integration model enables users to create a powerful ecosystem for their network. And Karin's going to show some specific examples of the ecosystem creation capabilities of the Itential platform. If you have any questions, please ask them along the way in the chat window, and we'll answer them in chat as well. So let's get started. In the Itential model, we think of the integrated ecosystem as having three elements. The first element is around exposure, and the goal of exposure is to be able to support a diverse community of consumers. The second element is the enhancement part, where we're going to utilize sources of truth and network systems and other sources of information to improve the intelligence of how our automations and orchestrations execute. And then third and finally is around extension. So the extend component of the ecosystem is about enabling connection to any technology domain and providing the ability to tap into existing automation assets. We're going to talk about each of these three in the subsequent sections. The Itential model typically will represent it this way, that the things that are around exposure are listed as green. Here we're talking about people, order systems, events, and pipelines. The middle layer is around enhancing with information from systems and being able to provide access to databases and other sources of truth. And then the purple on the bottom is around extending, really about talking to the different domains, the different types of systems, whether they be physical systems, virtual systems, or containerized systems. Starting at the top with the exposure layer, we've got a few objectives around exposure, but the main goal is to simplify how any kind of user can consume the capabilities of the orchestration and automation system. The way we do this is by providing a high level of flexibility around interaction and consumption of the system's capabilities. Starting on the left, where that's really the interactive use case, where engineers or users will log into the system, they will run workflows and automations from the system, they'll interact with forms, they'll provide inputs manually. I think in the early days of automation, that was really the predominant usage pattern. But more and more, we're seeing people want to go beyond that and start to expose those automation and orchestration capabilities to systems and events and things like that. So we've seen a rapid uptake in people integrating our platform with their order or ITSM systems. For example, recently we just launched a ServiceNow native application so that the order system can tap into all of the power of the automation platform. Additionally, we're starting to see scenarios where folks want to have automations dynamically kicked off by network events. So folks looking to get more and more into closed loop automations are either using network events like assurance systems to trigger alarms, or they're using their existing message buses to be able to provide that messaging around network conditions that can then be used as the trigger for the automation to kick off. Additionally, a number of folks in the DevOps and Net DevOps teams are looking to leverage their existing tooling around pipelines to be able to dip into the Itential platform to be able to execute a wide range of functionality. In some cases, it's sort of the native atomic capabilities of the platform. In other cases, they may be running the one-on-one workflows, or they want to leverage the integration capability of the platform to talk to systems that the Itential platform is already connected to. Karin, can we transition over to you so you can show us some examples of how Itential is providing that kind of exposure that I've described?
Yes, Morgan. So as the first part of our demonstration, what we're going to focus on is how Itential is enabling enterprises to expose all the automations being built rapidly in an easier fashion, but also securely. So specifically, as part of the demonstration today, we're going to see how the internal self-service application within the Itential automation platform someone can leverage to kick off automation and consume. But at the same time, as Morgan alluded to, Itential has released our new Itential ServiceNow application, which is making it easy for majority of the enterprises to take advantage of their current investment in ServiceNow to leverage, access into the cloud and network that Itential provides. And finally, we'll quickly discuss how, DevOps community can take advantage of the exposure, the API exposure that we have to our automations and take advantage and incorporate that as part of their existing pipelines and playbooks. So with that, I'm going to quickly share my screen and we're going to walk through how each of these exposure mechanisms work. So with that, as you can see, we have landed into our operations manager application. So this is one of the internal Itential automation platform application that serves a purpose of self-service for all the users logging into Itential and taking advantage of all the exposed automation. As you can see on the left-hand side, these are all the automations that the internal teams might have built, right? Some of these are focused on the cloud. Some of these are focused on your regional data center network and SD-WAN, etc. The goal is how do we provide an easier way for someone to consume some of these automations the way that they like to, right? Morgan mentioned there are different ways, like some of them are interactive. You might want to fill out a form in order to kick off an automation. Sometimes you might want to schedule it. Sometimes it's a telemetry and AI ops tool that is delivering events. And based on those events, we're going to trigger automation. And finally, the DevOps community likes to leverage some of these as a service, network or cloud as a service components as part of their own pipeline. So you'll notice here in this specific example, we have created an automation that performs a VPN connection compliance, which means it goes to AWS VPCs and figures out, if all the VPN connections are in compliant and up and running, and it might send off an email. Right. So there are 4 different ways that I'm identifying that someone can leverage this specific automation. One of them is manually. So there is a form associated where I can selectively pick which regions I want to run this compliance check on. Then you might have your pipelines that might want to do some testing as part of their own wider orchestration. Then you have a schedule way of actually running this compliance check on your VPN circuits daily or by the hour. And finally, based on a trigger that potentially happens based on some monitoring that's happening in CloudWatch or some other monitoring system out there in your data center, right? So for the purpose of this particular demo, for part of the consistency, what I'm going to do is kick off this automation first using a manual form. So you'll notice as part of this form, basically we're asking user to just request which particular region they're going to deploy their application in, and that hence they want compliance against that. So in this case, I'll just run manually, and you'll notice this is dynamically federating information using AWS API and pulling all the available regions. So in this case, because I'm going to deploy my application in US East, that's the compliance that I want. So when I run manually, you'll notice it has kicked off an automation and is going through its motion of interacting with AWS using its API, gathering the data, and providing the results via an email. So you'll notice we have successfully run this automation. When I click on this particular task within our ecosystem, you'll notice this was a result coming back from AWS, right? So this is being run real time against the US East region. So now as the second, as a follow-on part of this demonstration, as you saw, I was able to kick this off from within our own application. But as you notice, right, this same automation is now exposed via an API. And what that enables us to do is it enables something like in the Itential ServiceNow app to take advantage of that. So now currently we're in the ServiceNow ecosystem, and this is the Itential ServiceNow app. As you notice, I can now pick whichever Itential automation platform instance I want to choose. So in this case, I'll just choose the one that we're actually currently working with. And as you notice, it dynamically goes and pulls all the available automation based on my role within the organization, right? So whatever you saw within the Ops Manager application is now available here because I'm an admin. So, to keep it consistent, as you can see, we have that same connection compliance automation. So when I click on it, it understands that there's a form associated with it. It's the same form I filled out within Itential, but guess what? Now it's automatically rendered and exposed here within your ServiceNow ecosystem. So this basically, helps eliminate the burden that you might want to put on developers to create and recreate forms, because someone can create a form and associate that with an automation. Now, as a consumer, it's very easy for me to take advantage of that very rapidly. So just like I chose USD Swan, for our first part of the demo, I'm going to do the same and run this automation. And as you can see, just like it kicked off the previous automation, this has now triggered the automation, using the ServiceNow user, right? So it's the same automation being triggered through two different sources. And finally, to bring this to closure, now we're going to talk about how the DevOps community can take advantage of the same automation as part of their own pipeline. So what you're looking at right now is a long orchestrated pipeline that does a lot of different things, right? Instantiating infrastructure, deploying your application. But part of that is also connecting into the network. And how does it do that? It actually communicates with Itential, which has hooks into all your network domains that we're going to talk about later during the webinar. So as you can see, this step within your pipeline that reflects tunnel validation, this is good. This is actually a step that calls the same automation that I kicked off early on as part of a webinar, right? So in this case, if I rerun this particular step within the pipeline, it is going to take advantage of an exposed API by Itential to invoke the tunnel validation, which is a VPN compliance automation that we are actually running through other different sources, right? So it's going to create a container and it's going to execute as a power user of Itential APIs. And as you can see, it has successfully invoked and finished the automation. So if I go back to our, this is our operational visual for all the automations run through Itential. So when I click on all jobs, you'll notice the same automation, the VPN connection compliance automation, was kicked off successfully by me as a user through our Ops Manager application, ServiceNow app provided by Itential, but also through a pipeline, which is a system user, right? So this kind of goes to show how easily you can expose your automations to a wider crowd within your organization, so you can take full advantage of the automation being done by every single group within your enterprise or an SP. So that was the end of our first demonstration. I'm going to hand it back to Morgan to continue on with some of our pillars around the integrated approach.
Thanks, Karan. That was great. I think that one of the things that we firmly believe here at Itential is that the real value of any platform is how it can be consumed, how it can be exposed, how easy it is for different stakeholders within the organization to be able to utilize the power of automation. And I think these examples that you've shown really are great demonstrations of that this gives teams that are creating the network orchestrations and automations really strong tool set to be able to open the consumption and create a greater community of folks and systems and tools that can leverage the power of the automations. Next, we're going to talk about that enhancement element. As I said earlier, the focus of enhancement is being able to interact with systems and sources of truth within the network and other tools in the network to be able to provide more intelligence in the way that the orchestrations and automations happen. And I think this is one of those areas that really distinguishes how we view orchestration from perhaps other kinds of systems or even other kinds of platforms where a lot of the execution logic just ends up being very linear, right? And I know that we've talked in the past, and we will continue to talk about the synergies between things like pipelines and and our platform, right? And a pipeline is a good example of a relatively linear execution. You'll have your merge phase, you'll have your test phase, you'll have the deploy phase. And there's tremendous value that you get out of that because it adds a lot of consistency and it's a nice framework for executing things. What it doesn't do is effectively replicate a lot of network engineering logic, which in some cases contains dependencies, contains branch points based on what's happening in the network. So there's a lot of conditional things that happen in the way that some network changes happen. A lot of teams that we work with, for example, want to build in really robust pre-checks and post-checks. And part of that is being able to talk to the network, but then also to talk to systems that are watching the network so that you can use that information to make better decisions about is the network in a state that it's okay to make the change? And then once the change is done, did that change have the intended effect? And or was it disruptive to normal operations of the network? If that's the case, then maybe we need to roll back or take some other measures before we consider that the action to be done. So really I think the focal point of enhancement was let's make it as easy as possible to talk to those systems, those sources of truth, the topology systems, the AI ops systems. Let's reduce the amount of development, and in some cases, and whenever possible, eliminate the amount of development to be able to integrate with those systems, because that's where the real value, the real like richness of context becomes apparent. We also want to make it really simple for folks who are creating the automations and orchestrations to interact with those sources of truth. So not only do we use the database maybe to store values, but we use it to get information. And we'll use that information in a number of different ways in executing smarter orchestrations. And then we also want to be able to talk to systems like pipelines in those scenarios where there are strengths in some of the CI/CD tooling and infrastructure. So things like repositories, for example, things like some of the test frameworks that people have created in their pipelines become really useful assets for us to incorporate in the way that we're performing the automations and orchestrations. So Karin, back to you. Can you talk about some examples of how Itential really provides that opportunity to enhance through the ecosystem of east-west systems?
Yes, Morgan. Thank you. So as Morgan mentioned, right, it's very critical when we're looking at automating and orchestrating fully, and we're talking about a comprehensive set of services that are being provided that has a hint of pre-check, post-check, but also taking advantage of where our data sources are, right? Majority of the enterprises today have a distributed source of truth, not a single, right? So how do we integrate into these technologies that are storing your data about your customers, about your network, about your cloud assets, et cetera? But at the same time, you might also have monitoring technologies as well as discovery validation tool that we might have to go integrate into to make sure what we're about to go provision is actually going to work against your network, right? So, and the last part that Morgan also mentioned is it's becoming more and more critical that we integrate with your repositories, right? The whole concept around Git that folks get into the whole infrastructure as code mentality is some of the data is now being modeled within those files in your Git repositories, right? So it's very critical for an automation platform to be able to integrate across these systems, not only fetch information and federate information, but also be able to update real time. So all sources of truth are in sync with whatever was provisioned or deprovisioned from the network, right? So as part of this follow-on demonstration, I'm going to show you how Itential has focused on, eliminating the integration tax with all your sources of truth, with all your pipeline technologies, with all your discovery and telemetry tools in order to facilitate the enhancement of your automation and orchestration that is happening across the board. So with that, I'm going to reshare my screen and we'll quickly talk through, how Itential actually helps facilitate this motion. So what we're looking at right now is the Itential Automation Studio application, right? This is a suite where our NetOps, DevOps, CloudOps team actually take advantage of in order to build automation not only to make changes into the network, but more importantly, integrate into various different sources of truth so they can get information that will be required to provision the network or the cloud. So specifically in this example, you'll notice within the automation canvas, the two green boxes, right? These actually represent APIs provided by two different vendors. The first one being Netbox, right? And in this example, we're actually reaching out to Netbox real time using their API in order to fetch the interfaces available on a particular switch in a data center, so we can actually tie that as part of the application connectivity service, right? But in order for us to create that interface for connectivity, now I need an available IP from Infoblox. So that's what this particular task represents. It's an action that we're taking real time against the Infoblox technology to pull the next available IP. What's important to highlight as part of this automation here is as you integrate into more and more technologies, what becomes very critical and complex is the art of manipulating data, right? Because the script or an API that you're going to invoke later on in the process to provision the network requires or expects data in a certain format, right? Not necessarily how Infoblox or Netbox might give you. So that brings us to a fact that let's make it easy for your operational team in order to manipulate data. So this particular action here, which is our JSON schema transformation task and capability, turns out to be this particular application where our customers can drag and drop and leverage the methods available here on the right in order to manipulate data and merge data that is coming from various different sources. So going back to our example, because we're pulling interface data from Netbox and next IP, available IP from Infoblox, now my goal is to actually specifically pull out the interface as well as the next available IP and provide and make it available to my next set of APIs and scripts and playbooks, right? So in this example, you'll notice we're taking the output that we received, and this is the output that we got from making that API call to Netbox, and we're specifically making a query to pull out the available interface. At the same time, we're doing the same thing for the next available IP. What you'll notice is, in addition to just making the IP and the interface name available, we're also taking advantage of additional data manipulation. In this specific case, because I've written a Python script, and as part of my device configuration, it requires a subnet, right? So not only the IP, once I get the IP address from Infoblox, what I have the ability to do is associate the subnet mask right after it, right? Because that's how my script actually requires. So as you can see in this example, not only can you query data very rapidly, but when it's time for you to manipulate, because the next set of systems expect that data type or the input to be in a particular format, you don't now have to write code for it, right? So this helps facilitate wider participation from different individuals within the organization, because they have the tribal knowledge about what data to pass to what system, so they can do that rather easily in a very reusable format, right? And in addition to doing this at scale, you can also perform sets of testing where you can run through multiple simulation and what the data would be, so you actually get what the results will be as part of your automation strategy. Right. So once we have the data manipulation in place, we're merging a set of data and querying out the specific things that will be required for the next steps within the orchestration. So this particular automation by itself is geared towards taking advantage of our integration into your east-west system, such as Infoblox, Netbox, IP Fabric. And you'll notice on the right-hand side, there is a long list of adapters, the Itential adapters that help us connect into the system so we can take actions against it, right? So very easily, I can now go to, another source of truth, such as, PHP IPAM or even a GitLab, right? So you'll notice GitLab here, and I can go actually fetch certain files and data that could be utilized as part of my data gathering and validation, right? So this is our strategy for enabling enterprises in order to rapidly integrate into your east-west system in order to facilitate the enhancement of data, not only federating it for the purpose of provisioning, but also post provisioning, we also can go and update your inventory system, your monitoring system, because they have to be aware of what just happened, right? So this was just a small little example of how Itential is facilitating our customers in doing the enhancement step a little bit easier and faster. Back to you, Morgan.
Thanks, Karan. So in the expose phase, we're really talking about northbound. Like, how do we make things easy for folks to consume? In enhance, typically we're talking east-west. So we're talking to systems, we're talking to sources of truth, we're talking to parts of the network, but it's really about making sure that we can have the most robust and intelligent orchestration flows and automation flows as possible. All of this really is in service of this next part, which is the extend part. Extend is about reaching southbound, and we're focused on really two kinds of things. One is the network domains themselves, and the other is existing automation assets. So for us, we want to be able to not only talk to network controllers, but we want a flexible way to interact with network devices, whether they're physical, virtual, containers, anything that really looks like a configurable network element. And this includes things like routers and switches, but it also includes other things like VPCs and firewalls and load balancers. So there's a pretty broad diversity of those kinds of assets that we can consider to be part of the network. Down at the bottom, you see a few domains spelled out here. This isn't by any means extensive. For example, in the service provider space at Itential, we support a lot of customers in the 5G, 4G mobility domain, right? Equally, we're talking data center stuff, SD-WAN stuff, cloud, network services, IP layer, all kinds of things. But once we've got the ability to have that level of integration with those different domains, now we really unlock a lot of power, because all of the capabilities that Karan was showing you around how do we do enhancement, all of the tools that are native to the platform around things like Config Manager, Automation Studio, all of those tools can be applied to this diversity of different network domains. So you can use things like the compliance engine and the config manager to run compliance across a bunch of different kinds of assets. The second part, as I mentioned, was also this ability to ingest and extend existing automation assets. By this, I mean, for any of our end users that already have or continue to develop things like Ansible playbooks or Python scripts or Terraform plans, the system can recognize those, can ingest those, and then can make those available to be incorporated into larger workflows for automation and orchestration. So where previously an engineer might have a Python script, to run that Python script, they would need to collect information and be able to kind of say what the targets were, what the changes needed to be. We can leverage the capability of the platform, particularly that sort of enhancement functionality that we talked about, to do all of that work so that you can really leverage that playbook specifically for the way it's meant to be used, but you don't necessarily need to do all of that heavy lifting to be able to get it prepared, and then also to do the cleanup or do the post checks once it's been run. Karan, can you show the folks some examples of how Itential provides this extension into the domains and into the assets?
Hey, Morgan, absolutely. So the next part of our demonstration, what we're going to focus on is a couple of set of applications, right? Configuration Manager, as Morgan mentioned, providing that single pane of glass where we can federate a concept of an asset or a device across multiple of these domains, right? Whether it's your data center set of devices, whether it's campus switches, it's security assets, but also cloud constructs like VPCs and VNet and SD-WAN access points and switches, right? It's to kind of give you that holistic view of how you can operate your network and automate your network without having to swivel chair. So that's the first bit, right? And we're going to focus on how the adapters and our concepts of integration enable us to do that. But then you also have the concept of harmonizing all the assets that DevOps and NetOps teams have already built over the years, right? It's your scripts and your investment and playbooks, etc. How do we make sure those are now made available within the platform for someone to take advantage of instead of reinventing the wheel, right? So we're going to discuss both of these concepts as part of the next demonstration. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and we will get started. As you can see, we have now landed within the Itential's Configuration Manager application. And this actually facilitates almost like a single pane of glass across your network and cloud, right? On the left-hand side, you will notice there is a long list of assets. These are, so-called devices. Some of these are CLI and Netcom driven switches in your data center and your campus. For example, this iOS switch, right? This is a router where I'm able to, when you click on it, I have the ability to load live configuration on this device. When I click on that as a user, I just get, the CLI configuration on the Cisco switch. At the same time, instead of me having to swivel chair, because Itential provides a lot of these integrations out of box, we call them pre-built integrations. As soon as you onboard one of these integrations within the platform, and when we start talking to, let's say, your Meraki controller, just like how I was able to load live config or take a backup or run compliance on this Cisco iOS switch, I can do the same action on a Meraki access point, right? So what you're taking a look at right now is we're connecting into the DevNet environment, and it has all sorts of APs available, right? So when I click on one of these, we will get a response back, and it's not CLI, right? Some of these are API-driven constructs. So the configuration for the specific access point or a switch within the SD-WAN domain returns back in a JSON format. So imagine being able to run things like, daily or nightly backup and compliance against both sets of assets, whether they're CLI, Netcom-driven, but also API-driven. And one of the critical examples, that Morgan mentioned is majority of the enterprises and our customers and SPs are now, putting their infrastructure across multiple of these domains, not just the data center, right? So now you have cloud assets. So just like I was able to perform these sort of actions on your, SD-WAN AP or a router or a security asset, now if I go and look for some of the cloud assets, because I have onboarded an AWS adapter, I can do the same thing against my VPC, right? So imagine being able to get live configuration for your VPC and making sure they're in compliance with your corporate strategy on how users are taking advantage of cloud native constructs, right? So this is an example of how we're taking advantage of our integration and harmonizing that into this application called Configuration Manager, where you can perform these uniform tasks against a multitude of these assets within your network. The second part is, when you kind of gear towards API first strategy, you also have to make sure that you're honoring your CLI driven and Netcom driven infrastructure. And for that reason, Itential has the Itential Automation Gateway application. And as you can see on the left-hand side, your usual DevOps tools like Ansible and Terraform and Nornier and NetMiko, these are first-class citizens within this application. And what this enables you to do is not only extend the reach into your non-programmable set of assets in your network, but also federate all your existing assets. So for example, when I click into this Ansible tab, you'll notice, we're federating all the collections made available in the community. But at the same time, if you have users and engineers that have created Ansible playbooks, you can now onboard those within the automation gateway, and they become available as a drag and drop asset within the canvas. So somebody who is not an Ansible expert or a Terraform expert still has the ability to leverage the IP that other SMEs have created within your organization, right? So the same concept applies to something like a script, right? I'm not a Python expert personally, but someone who has written this script has decorated, which means they have provided some constraints on what the inputs are. I can actually drag and drop this script within the automation platform and use that as part of my wider orchestration, right? So these sort of strategy enables all of our customers to harness their existing investments, but also as they onboard newer API-driven technology, they can use our Itential adapters to quickly extend the reach and automate and orchestrate across it. And in this specific example, as you can see, as first part of this automation here, we're taking advantage of our API integration into Netbox and Infobox. But at the same time, when I quickly zoom into it, you'll notice we are also harnessing a Python script, an Ansible playbook, and an API towards a controller like SD-WAN Viptela, right? So all of the assets onboarded within the automation gateway, which are, script driven or Ansible driven or Terraform driven, automatically appear here. So if I search for playbook, you'll notice these are all the playbooks made available that I can drag and drop and actually take advantage of right away as part of my automation strategy, right? So this goes to show, from a platform perspective, as you have different teams taking advantage of different tools, we're kind of providing a common ground where they can bring all that together and attack automation at a more rapid pace instead of being it more swivel chair and handoffish. So that was a quick little example of how Itential is federating across different network-facing technology across different domains, but also giving you a single pane of glass with all your assets that you might have already created within the organization. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Morgan. Thank you, Morgan.
Okay, so Karan, thank you for that. I think you've gone through a lot in a short amount of time, but I think it's really a testament to the power of the platform. And I think ultimately what we're looking to build up towards is this environment where all of these pieces can be at play, right? We've got the ability to then expose to a pretty diverse set of users. So what we end up with when you take a look at all of the capabilities at the exposure component, the enhancement component, the extend component, now you really unlock the true power of the platform, which is I can take any set of automations, I can apply them to any domain or system, and I can expose them to any kind of user so that my experience from my DevOps team, they can leverage all of the functionality. That's the same functionality that my engineers who are logging into, which I can then also expose to my order system or to my event system. So suddenly using this common set of tooling creates tremendous efficiencies because people can then start to build on this. They can modularize this. They can start to really get a new level of interaction and control over their network assets by taking advantage of this core functionality, which is really driven through the integration and federation capabilities of the Itential platform. And what we've seen has been really tremendous adoption, and you'll see just some examples of logos of systems in here. This is really scratching the surface, and what's continues to be exciting for me at Itential is we have end users who go in directions that we never anticipated and start to automate use cases that we really hadn't considered in the early days of Itential, but it's completely appropriate for them because of the way that the technology is engineered to be able to do that. So they can start to do things where they're incorporating SD-WAN services with security services and cloud assets and layer 3, layer 2 routing assets and creating these really functionally complicated, but the implementation is relatively simple, like super powerful automations that enable them to get true control over their network environment. So Karan, do you want to just talk about a couple examples of these end-to-end automations, and then we can wrap things up?
Hey, Morgan. Yes, absolutely can. So as Morgan mentioned, right, we kind of went through the motions of how do you expose, how do you enhance, and how do you extend. So the last part of this demonstration is going to focus on an end-to-end automation that was created taking advantage of all the integrations that Itential provides out of box, but also include some of the pre-built automations, right? Some of the pre-can things that someone can take advantage of right away against their infrastructure in conjunction with all the existing assets that customers and and enterprises and SPs have already created in forms of scripts and playbooks, etc. Right? So how does it all come together, and how does it get exposed to your end user who are basically wanting an easier and faster and a secure way of taking advantage of all the automation goodness happening across these domains by various different teams, right? So with that, I'm going to quickly share my screen again, and we'll walk through, an example of what that end-to-end automation would look like with a flavor of, inclusion of sources of truth, your scripts and playbooks, but also API-driven technologies with a concept of pre-builts, right, which is a child automation. So specifically in this example, as you remember, right, so quickly zoom into it. In the first part, instead of someone having to fill out 15 fields as a service request, we're going to make it very easy for an end customer, right? Just to give us a few key pieces of information, but based off of that information, we can actually go to our sources of truth and derive key values that might be required to provision network assets, whether it's security driven, SD-WAN driven, or cloud driven, right? Specifically in this example, for application connectivity service, right? This is a service we're going to expose to our end customer. Basically, they're just asking for access into a DB that sits behind a secure firewall in the data center, right? In order for that to happen, we have to create interfaces and pipe those through and open up firewall rules and also modify SD-WAN policies. So how do we kind of group all that together so it's basically as a service to your consumer? So in this case, we're going to take advantage of APIs provided by Netbox and Infoblox, and then take advantage of, data manipulation capabilities within the platform. So we get the right data to the next set of, scripts and playbooks that are going to be doing the provisioning, but also APIs, right? So once we're past the data transformation stage, we're going to be taking advantage of a script that someone internally wrote that creates an interface. At the same time, there's a data center focus access list manipulation playbook that a security engineer wrote in their own world. So I want to take advantage of that instead of rewriting it some other way. And finally, this is a vendor provided API for me to manipulate an SD-WAN policy. So at the end of this, we're going to capture all the information, the changes that we have made, and then drop a notification using this pre-built automation that's readily available for all customers out of box, right? So we have tons of these that customers can take advantage of in order to get ahead with respect to automating across different technologies, right? So this is our example of end-to-end automation. Once I've built this automation, now it's time to expose it. And I know we previously covered how someone could expose automation through the Itential automation platform. It's through this Ops Manager application, right? So as you notice, this is our application connectivity orchestration that we have built that integrates into various different technologies. At the same time, I have the ability to enable pipelines to take advantage of this automation, but also a manual input form. As you can see on the right-hand side, there's just a little one single drop down that allows customers and your end user to say, where are they deploying their application? And based on just this single piece of information, we're going to orchestrate the rest of it, which means pull the IPs, pull the switches, pull the access lists that need to be modified, right? Once we have exposed this through the Ops Manager, what I'm actually going to do is, instead of invoking this automation from within Itential, majority of our enterprises and other customers have kind of, let me re-log in, have decided, ServiceNow to be their input, right? This is your self-service portal to the rest of the organization. So instead of someone having to forcefully log into the automation platform, now you can expose all the automation to from within the tools that they already use today. So from here, what I'm actually going to do is point the Itential ServiceNow application to our automation platform. And as you can see, it has successfully pulled all the available automations. So what we're going to actually invoke today is the application connectivity service. And as you see, there was a form associated to request this automation, and it's dynamically rendered here, right? So in the future, if I'm providing enhancement to this connectivity service, and if I modified the form, it will automatically just be seen here without anyone having to do anything within the ServiceNow ecosystem, right? So this is how we provide that velocity with which your NetOps and CloudOps team can make changes and enhancements to your automation without, providing a burden to the ServiceNow team. All right, so let's go ahead and kick off this automation. I'm just going to say this time around, I'm going to deploy in US West, right? So when I click on this run automation, I can go and review the details. So as you can see, we have kicked off this automation successfully through ServiceNow, right? But as part of this, I'll quickly deep dive into some of the actions that are happening. So us pulling next available interfaces, us actually getting the next available API. So because we capture all information, any API call, any execution that we do, all of that is audited. You have the ability to figure out what were the inputs and the outputs. Now, going back to the, data transformation task, as you can see, you have the ability to see what the input was. This was the output coming back from Netbox, but what we're able to pull out. So I specifically wanted to pull out the name of the interface that we're going to create, the IP made available by Infoblox, and also the destination IP that we manipulated by adding the /32, right? Because I only want one interface to kind of go through the motion. So the next part is leveraging that information within your script that somebody else within the organization created. So as you can see, this is a Python script, and these were the incoming variables. We were able to fetch the loopback information and the IP information from Netbox and Infoblox, respectively, and actually put that as inputs to this specific script, right? So it becomes important on how you can go to different sources of truth and facilitate information required for the next set of tasks you have to do to provision the network. Similarly, we're doing the same thing with the playbook. The playbook requires a set of information, and we're actually capturing that real time from different sources of truth. And finally, from an SD-WAN perspective, we have a known policy, which is a corporate policy that we're going to invoke and activate. So our traffic can flow from, the application staged in the cloud and get access to all the database on-prem, right? So at the end of this, we capture all the information. As you can see, these were all the information that we got as inputs. And from an outgoing perspective, we have created title and message that we're going to drop as a notification within MS Teams. So for a split second, now that the automation has successfully completed, if we go back to MS Teams, you'll notice Itential has dropped a notification for different teams, just to let you know as an audit step what we actually did, right? We gathered interface data, we created network interfaces in the network, we modified ACLs, and we activated a SD-WAN policy, right? So this kind of goes to show how Itential enables our customers to not only facilitate this sort of multi-domain and multi-technology orchestration, but how can we expose this faster so that customers and the consumers have the ability to take advantage of automation rapidly and securely, right? So that was the end of our last demonstration that showcased our end-to-end capability of not only, extending towards wider domains like multi-domain, enhancing, leveraging, third-party system, east-west integration, but also exposing the automation so multitude of personnel within the organization can take advantage of the innovation happening. I'm going to hand off to Morgan. Thank you, Morgan.
Thank you, Karan. I really appreciate that. That was a lot, and you did a great job. So just to kind of recap, right, I think the things that we wanted to make sure that people understood was for this sort of synthesis of all of these different functionalities, it's really about performing end-to-end activities where we're able to leverage all of those workflow components around tasks and flows and child workflows, incorporate the inputs from the east-west systems, start to leverage things like playbooks and scripts and Terraform plans, be able to talk across all those network devices, and be able to take that capability and really enrich how people are starting to leverage the automation in a way that gives them maximum flexibility with really the least amount of sort of busy work, legwork, development stuff, and be able to just focus on making those orchestrations as opposed to really needing to worry about how do I talk to this, or how do I expose it this way? So it's really about simplifying the things that normally will take a lot of time but don't necessarily have a huge big impact on the business, and really let people focus on those things. So what you're going to see going forward, and I've been working with the team on the agenda for the next few months worth of webinars, is to start to explore deeper around some of these areas. So I know, for example, we've got some CI/CD stuff coming up where we're building on a lot of the topics we covered today, but also things we talked about in the previous CI/CD webinars, to really show people how in depth and focus on just that piece of how to get more mileage out of the work that they're doing and better synergies between the platforms. So with that said, I want to thank everybody for your participation, or for your attendance and participation, and your attention, and look forward to talking with you all in the future. So thanks again, Karin, and everybody have a good day.
Thank you, Morgan. Thank you, everybody.